Thanks, guys, for coming. I want to start as well, of course, by thanking Art Digit team for inviting me to speak today about art journalism in turbulent times. And in this talk, I'll speak about the importance of art, even when the world is in chaos, about how journalism and communication has changed, and then give some examples of the kinds of things the art newspaper, who I work for, has produced in turbulent times to contribute in some small way to the world. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Aimee Dawson, and I'm the Deputy Digital Editor at the Art newspaper. I'll talk a bit about the Art newspaper later, but essentially it's a news publication, both a monthly print newspaper and a daily updated website that focuses on the visual arts, from antiquity to contemporary art. And I work on our website, editing, commissioning, writing news every day, and also on our digital products like our newsletters, our podcasts, social media, and our app. Yes, that's a very big picture of me. Okay. So yes, first I'll introduce myself. So I actually used to live in Egypt 10 years ago because I was back in 2010, 2011, on my year abroad for my degree in Arabic and Middle East Studies. And I went on to do a master's in contemporary Middle Eastern art at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. And I've now been at the Art newspaper for 6 years. But I continue to regularly travel to the Middle East and report on the region. So let's crack on with the talk. One of the things that happened during the pandemic is that the sense of what is essential or key really changed. And the idea of ranking those and openly saying them became commonplace. In the UK, we would talk constantly about key workers, those who are on the front line, service people or medical professionals, keeping us alive and keeping the country running. And artists were listed as the most unessential job in a survey from the Straits Times in Singapore, which obviously caused a great deal of outrage on social media and online. And I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with me when I say that art's important, that creativity is a central part of who we are as human beings and an essential element in national identity. And this week with Art Digit has truly demonstrated this. And this was also the thought behind one of the most important operations to save cultural history in modern times. So I'm just going to read this quote. You can wipe out an entire generation, you can burn their homes to the ground, and somehow they'll still find their way back. But if you destroy their history, you destroy their achievements, and it's as if they never existed. So this quote is from the 2014 film Monuments Men, which if you've not seen is great. And it's from Frank Stokes, played by George Clooney. The character's based on George Stout, who was the real-life conservator and museum director who helped start the Monuments Men. And the Monuments Men is the name made famous for the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives section of the Allies, a small corps of mostly middle-aged men and a few women who interrupted careers as historians, architects, museum curators and professors to help protect Europe's cultural heritage. Together during the war, they found and recovered countless artworks stolen by the Nazis. But what does this have to do with art journalism? So art journalism is about taking the art world, often seen as a bubble, and connecting it to its current events in the wider world. Art is part of an ecosystem, what is happening politically, socially, ecologically, both internationally and locally. It's crucial to understanding how art and its market are developing. Let's see if I can make this play. No, I can't make it play. And that's exactly what the Art newspaper has been doing for the last 30 years. So to give a little bit of information about the publication, it was founded in 1990, and since then it has been making sense of the rapidly growing, increasingly international art world. And we don't just write about art. Our news relates to what is happening in the world at large, from politics and the economy to developing technology and the environment. And we began as a print newspaper in a tiny office in Fleet Street. And now we have offices in London and New York, a network of sister papers, and 50 reporters across 30 countries. So we're truly global in reach. And our regularly updated website and social media platforms mean we bring art news to the world around the clock. So the title of this presentation is interesting to me because in reality, the world's always been turbulent, at least somewhere. So places experience trauma more regularly than others for lots of reasons, but somewhere in the world, there's always trauma. And I think really that the reason we feel like the world is an increasingly traumatic place is because we are constantly developing the ways to transmit news and information about it. Back in the medieval times, it may take months to hear of a far-off war or destruction because the news had to travel by word of mouth or from an envoy traveling great distances. And now things like the internet and social media make us instantly connected, so we can know what's going on anywhere in the world in a matter of moments. And social media is the most fascinating development in the way that we communicate. I write a monthly column for the art newspaper called Insta Gratification. And it looks at how the art world's favorite app, Instagram, in great detail, and how art and Instagram collide and change one another. And in the beginning weeks of the pandemic, it was social media that really offered a space to share information, find solace, while countries all over the world faced lockdowns. And people made memes, shared artworks that inspired them, created campaigns about the best online resources, and started doing Instagram or Facebook Lives as forms of entertainment. So I thought it would be fun to take it to Instagram and ask people what they thought about the premise of this talk. So I did a poll and asked whether art journalism really is important even in turbulent times. And 84% said yes, and 16% said no. Interestingly, 2 of the people who said no are actually my colleagues, so proof that journalism makes you very cynical. So I'm going to read out some of the answers that I got from this little poll. And someone smarter than me said STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and maths subjects, tells us how to save the world, but arts are the reason why. If we stop talking about art, why is it the world worth fighting for? Art reflects times, and it never stops. If we lose our fundamental love of art in turbulence, we lose an important part of being human. Because artists are still important. I think that's really central. Stories don't stop and can often inspire or provide a sense of relief. The art world is changing so fast, art journalism is essential to analyze critically. So I made a little list here of the reasons why I think art journalism is important, and those responses touched on things that I've been thinking about too. And one of the key things is the fact that the market doesn't stop. We often like to think about the art world being this bubble, and sometimes we don't even think about that there's a whole industry behind it. And it's essential to keep that industry alive because it genuinely puts food on people's table and roofs over their heads. You know, it's an actual job for people. And the fact that artists don't stop, I think, is really important. So much in the pandemic, there have been loss of income for artists, art institutions, cultural workers, and some countries have coped with this better than others. Germany and France in particular have given so much to artists to keep them going. But if we don't support them, talk about them, keep alive the industry that they're a part of, then we lose this whole profession. Another thing that I think is really important and relates to the social media aspect of things is there's more fake news than ever. And this is a journalism-wide phenomenon. But even in the art world, you know, we have a duty to make sure that these stories are legitimate and that people are reading actual news. And the last one, which is my favorite, to bring joy, hope, comfort, distraction, particularly with COVID-19, of course, thinking there. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Have a think, and after, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's talk about COVID, which I guess is our most recent global turmoil. During the beginning of the pandemic, the art newspaper website experienced an incredible surge in visitors. And of course, we were regularly publishing news about developments, and mostly they were cancellations in the beginning. But people were desperately seeking content and information, and we worked so hard to provide that. So I'm going to show you a few of the initiatives that we started digitally to try and be as useful as possible during the pandemic. We published several listicles about art resources online, from video content to podcasts, and I regularly monitored the social media to find the most up-to-date information. And we produced some lists of resources for funding to help people who were suffering financially from all the closures and so on during the pandemic. And we received more information, we would update it. And this article on the left here, it is your left, yes, left, was actually the most viewed website article on our website in 2020. Hundreds of thousands of views. We also collected messages of hope and comfort from international artists, including Ai Weiwei, Marina Abramovic, Shireen Nishat, David Hockney. And the Hockney piece in particular went viral and appeared in lots of national newspapers in the UK and abroad. And he also, so it was, his little note to the world was, do remember they can't cancel the spring. And he did follow that up again when winter came around. And don't forget that they can't cancel Christmas. And another thing that we discovered was that podcast listeners increased enormously. In the US, for example, 22% of consumers say they listen to podcasts more than usual during the pandemic. So we responded. We already had one podcast series, The Week in Art, where we tackle the big art news of the week. During the pandemic, we added a section at the end of the episode called Work of the Week, which looked at works of art that at this point were all hidden behind closed museum doors, and talked about them in great detail in a way to try and keep them alive. But then we responded to this desire for more audio content and created a new podcast series called A Brush With, which shares in-depth interviews with leading artists talking about the things that inspire them, from books and music to personal life experiences. And it's worth mentioning at this point that tracking and analyzing the data from users was so important during the pandemic. It's really important all of the time, but the trends, the normal patterns you would see changed so much during the pandemic. So we were able to respond to what the readers wanted to see and what was performing best. So we used the analytics program Parsley, and this here is a graph showing the number of visits to our website in 2020. I've hidden the numbers. And the highlighted part shows the first few months of the year where you can see the number of users spiking. And it goes up again at the end of the year when many people were back in lockdowns all over the world. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of the kinds of content we created during the pandemic is social media. We started using the hashtag #ArtCanHelp so that our readers and social media followers could engage with us and share their own thoughts and tell us the things that they've been watching and reading, which is the kind of information that statistics just won't show. And one of the things that really surprised me during the pandemic was just how much humor was being used to cope with the situation. The number of art memes that came out of it were amazing and also just a real relief. And we shared these on our platforms and got really great responses from our followers. And this piece is actually what we call an Artoon, which we commission every month from the artist Pablo Helguera. And you'll see it's not a performance piece, it's just one of my co-workers at a Zoom meeting who doesn't realize we can all see him naked. We've all been there. And the creativity was just boundless. This was what artists were doing during lockdown. And another social media initiative that was really amazing was the Artist Support Pledge. It is an initiative that's still ongoing. And it was set up by an artist called Matthew Burrows. The concept was simple. Artists were invited to post pictures of their works for sale for £200 or less on Instagram with the hashtag Artist Support Pledge. And every time an artist makes £1,000 in sales, they then pledge to put £200 on purchasing the work of another artist using the hashtag. There are no enforcements. It's a system entirely based on trust. And this idea generated £9 million in 1 week. And we were able to help promote this by writing about it and sharing it with our readers. And Matthew went on to receive an MBE from the Queen for his service to the arts. So I want to wind things up by talking about an example of current turbulence, which is close to my heart, which is the situation in Afghanistan. And I think we were all shocked by the scenes that unfolded in August as the Taliban took back control of Afghanistan and people scrambled to be evacuated on foreign planes. And the front page of our October issue ran a story about how artists were suffering under the new regime. It was written by an excellent journalist called Savi Jarampaya, who was in touch with lots of artists on the ground. And the story she was sharing felt too important to leave to a single story. So my editor, Alison Cole, and I worked with Savi to create a series called Dispatches from Afghanistan. And it profiles Afghan artists and cultural workers, shares their experiences since the rise of the Taliban, and keeps the story of Afghanistan in the news. And the main message from the people interviewed was that they felt abandoned. And I'll just read this quote. "We, artists and cultural workers, really did not expect that one day we would end up in this situation and that the world would turn its back on us, that artists around the world would leave us, that the world's politicians would leave us, to not be a story anywhere in the world and for no one to speak about our misery anywhere. We expected that at least the artists from around the world would support us. We worked on so many important issues in this country for democracy, for values, for culture, for civilization, for modernization. We wanted things to change here, but all of a sudden the country is in the hands of the terrorists and we have been left with it." I think it's a very powerful series. And we also collated a list of ways that people could help support these artists so that we weren't just reporting the horrors, but also showing constructive ways to help. And that's something that we really learned from our COVID coverage, is that it's important to report the news, it's important to share initiatives, but one of the best things that you can do sometimes is collect ways of actually physically being able to help and not be quite so passive with our reporting. And the final point I want to make, it's a short presentation, is that art journalism is important for sharing stories about amazing initiatives like Forever Is Now. This exhibition is going to open so many doors in Egypt, and I've seen it already this week. So many conversations have been started, so many debates and ideas, collaborations that are already started. And it's going to be amazing for artists and art lovers. And it's an honor to have been able to report on it as it progressed in the past years from Nadine's dream to this amazing reality. So I'll end with my points here. And I would love any questions that you have and love to hear what you think, whether art journalism is important even in turbulent times. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yeah, there are so many little ways of helping. Attendance is so important, especially now when attendance is generally low for things like exhibitions as we get back to normal. when funders or supporters, people who are putting these things together, see that people are reacting positively and in great numbers, it makes them realize how important it is. And I think you can see that from this exhibition at the Pyramids. It's had such an incredible response. So many people are going, and it has made people, organizers, governments, look at this and say, this is really important. And people are responding really positively. So just physically attending is so important. But another thing that you can do, posting on social media, is so good. It's so important to tag and show support for the especially smaller initiatives. And so often we find stories for the art newspaper on social media. We're all social media fiends. There's nothing we love more than to scour through looking at artist accounts, but also, people who are attending, what are people saying? So just by putting your opinion out there, showing that you've been there and posting images is a great way to get our attention so that we'll be writing about it, and then hopefully it will reach even more people.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned earlier that the art newspaper started off with just one location and now you opened up branches in different parts of the world. What enabled that growth? Like, how does the art newspaper, is it rooted in certain cities, and why does it seem less viable than other ones? And then I guess the other part of that question is, could the art newspaper have a branch in Cairo?
That'd be great. So it actually, the international edition that I work for, which is English language, was not the first one. The first one was the Italian version, Giornale dell'Arte. And Italians are such big art lovers, but of course, this spread we opened in London, actually, because the founding editor was married to the editor of the Italian version. And it spread quite slowly like that. It spread, to kind of the hubs first, then it went to France. We had the Journal des Arts. And now it's owned by a Russian lady who's really remarkable. And she opened the Russian branch, and then it's part of her business model to spread it to other places. So it's now in China. There's a Japanese version opening. There's one in Israel. I think the growth will continue. Arts and culture as an industry is growing constantly. And it's used as soft power, so it has a lot of government backing too. We've tried several times to open a Arabic version of the art newspaper, but it's difficult just because finding the funding, because they do take money to get started before they become kind of self-sufficient. And the places that do have the money aren't necessarily as free in terms of their journalism as we would need to be able to open it with a good conscience. So I would absolutely love it if one day there was an art newspaper, Egypt. I'm signing up as editor right now. Throw my hat in the ring.
Wondering the folks who are local, who are here, and what the reception for critical writing is. Work here, is it writing that's out there? Is it actually sort of digging into the work and pointing out weaknesses and things like that? Or is it just not a lot of that happening? Or is there another that kind of critical engagement?
I think there are more and more of these kinds of things opening. Again, it can be difficult, I think, to be a publication here, and especially if you're being critical. Cairo Scene is a really lovely publication that's done a lot with Forever Now as well. And I think a lot of the publications that were around when I was around 10 years ago don't exist anymore, because I think it's tricky. It's a tricky business. Criticality, I think, because when a scene is so small, you end up being very supportive. You see this a lot. You see it in art schools too sometimes, all over the world. When you don't want to say like critical, deeply analytical things necessarily, because you want to be very supportive. You want to nurture something that's very embryotic. So there is a lot of, I don't know, like back patting and things like that. But I think, art criticism, which is, part of art journalism, it's a very difficult skill. There's only a handful of art critics that I would say are very well respected, even in the UK. And so to build that takes time. But 100%, I see this kind of trajectory for Egypt coming from something so big like this that's had such global attention, and having had the conversations I've had this week with people saying the plans that they're already making, the things that are going into motion, it sounds like there will be probably a very rapid development of this scene. And I mean, that's great news. Inshallah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much, Aimee, for this presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.